Hello and welcome back to the Cards War Room channel. We have a new balance patch right on the horizon. In fact, when this video is out, it should have dropped by then. And today I have with me two experts to help me break it down. I have Darkness and Jking. So I think the first card that gets changed is quite a controversial one. This is Long Range Recon. And it's been changed from this sort of resistance staple where, you know, your HQ gains defense based on how many cards and units are on the board from your opponent, to now being maybe sort of a Legions thing where it has intel and it, you know, it helps you if you have lots of units on the board. Now, you guys seem fairly experienced in resistance. Jking, moving forward, do you think resistance is still going to be playable? Maybe with cards like Call to the Colonies without long range recon? And do you think there may be some sort of Legions Japan deck that comes out with this?
In regards to Japan-France resistance, I think the deck is still playable because the core components of the deck, the cards that make the deck strong, of Phony War, Last Rites, those are all the same. It's just not going to be tier 1 anymore because you really relied on being able to get so much healing off of long range recon. It's possible you still play it as is with 1 or 2 copies. It's possible you take it out of the deck altogether and try to replace it with guards to conserve health. But the deck's certainly a lot weaker. In regards to a potential Japan-Poland Legions deck, I've not tried that in the current version of the game, but I'm excited to try it out, and it has potential. It does have to contend with the new Legions card that got released in the new Poland card that got released in the last expansion, the 3k heal based on get an order from the deck and heal for its cost. I think that might be actually just better intel healing, but we'll have to see. Maybe you run both.
Well, I think long range recon is way weaker in the resistance deck because you barely play any units in the resistance deck. So and the enemy amount of cards is not counting anymore. This heal card now is way weaker, so that is very bad for this deck. It's still playable. I guess it's still in tier 2 deck because it can be still great against aggro with a lot of AoE, with a lot of pin. The way I'm looking at long range recon now, it's more on control decks. There used to be some Brit Japan control decks with a lot of pin, a lot of stole, a lot of heal, and this looks a little bit more into that version, like you're pinning a lot of units before you're playing AoEs or to the last man to kill everything, and with that you can get a lot of heal, and the intel mechanic is of course interesting as well and helpful in control decks.
Awesome, and then the next change is the Calm Before the Storm. Quite a potent buff. It's gone from 3k cost to 4k cost, so they've increased it by 1. And the two decks which, in my mind, get hit by this the most are sort of some Brit Air decks which like to run this, and the Germany-Japan Fast Hinds. But I want to focus a little bit more on that Fast Hinds, because that deck recently got nerfed with changes to cards like For the Emperor, no longer affecting German or non-Japanese units. Do you think with this change to Calm Before the Storm, Germany-Japan Hinds is dead and USA is the only way to play it now? Or do you think there's still some sort of world where you can play that? What do you think, Darkness?
Well, German-Japan is still an playable deck. At least like in the middle of the player base, and for beginner, it has a lot of aggro potential and a lot of high roll potential, but it's definitely not in tier 2, maybe, well, not tier 1, maybe not even tier 2 deck anymore. US is definitely stronger. And I don't know why you focus on Hinds, because I think this nerf is focusing Brit Air, the current one of the strongest decks out there, and this buff card was enabling it a lot. So I think the major point of this nerf is towards Brit Air, reducing the incredible power potential with Calm Before the Storm onto like 3 units. For example, turn 1 and turn 2 you play 3 1-credit fighters or bombers, and turn 3 you make all of them 4/4. That was kind of ridiculous. I like that.
One of the reasons was due to my follow-up question, which is, Jking, you've ran almost an identical Brit Air list for quite a long time now. Are we going to see some changes with it due to this Calm Before the Storm change, or is it still going to be almost identical to how it previously was?
That's a very interesting question, and we're going to have to see, because this Calm Before the Storm card being run in Brit Air is the card that just individually made Brit Air tier 1, in my opinion. If we think back before this card was released, Brit Air saw some play at the top of the ladder, saw some play in tournaments, but it wasn't super popular. It was definitely not considered the best deck in the game. But then Calm Before the Storm was released, and this was the only new card put in that deck. We've since gotten the addition of Wellington and Spitfire from the Battle of Britain patch, but I think this Calm Before the Storm nerf definitely hits the deck hard, but I think it's just probably going to knock it back to the tier 1 on par with other decks, or maybe even down to tier 2, but I think that might be a bit much. So I expect I'll still be running the card, but there's another card that's been changed in this patch that I might try out in Brit Air, but we'll get to that.
Awesome. And then the next change, I don't want to spend too long on this one. This is L640. It's getting a reduction in defense from 3 to 2, and this might seem like a really, really weird change. And this is actually due to the next card that's getting changed, which is going to be the 99th Infantry. Do you guys think L640 would have been completely out of control if it wasn't for this change? Or do you think it would have just not seen play even if they'd left it as a 1-3? Jking, what do you think? And obviously I'm talking about competitive play here.
I definitely think with the new 99th change, L640 would have become a deck we see a lot on ladder and a lot in OCC if they had kept it as a 1-3. I wouldn't even be that surprised if it saw some people trying it out at a 1-2. And I think an interesting side effect of this change is that some people, such as Darkness, actually, at the World Championship, had begun running L640 in Control as a potential way to retreat cards back to your hand. And actually, the health reduction on that makes it easier to kill off your L640. So it could actually be seen as a potential buff in very niche circumstances.
That is true. Now your root out will kill your own L640 now. Well, actually, no, is root out +1 -1 -2 or -2 -1? I forget.
-1 -2.
And Darkness, the card which is sort of relevant to this, which got changed, is the 99th Infantry Battalion. Do you want to give us some insight into the change that actually happened to this unit and how that will affect the meta, and possibly why this came into effect in the first place?
Well, the US-German mid-range deck is probably the strongest deck right now, because it is strong against air and very stable overall. One of the reasons it was like super powerful early on was the 99th Infantry Battalion. Decent stats, like basic 2 credit unit stats, 2, 3, and 1 operation cost for 2 credits. But if you have the front line, you can retreat any unit, like even Grenadier Guards, even a Mort train, anything. And this gave you a huge tempo potential, not only turn 3, maybe even turn 2 when you retreat as a complete turn of your opponent. This scales up. And 99th Infantry Battalion was a very, very strong elite for a very, very long time. So it's only reasonable they changed that. They reduced one HP, and now it's not a retreat mechanic anymore. This weakens US mid-range against guards, like tanks, a more train, for example. They only have half track to remove infantry and air consistently. And on paper, this unit looks like an buffed 17th Infantry Battalion. 2/2 deployment effect, buff 1 unit with +1/+1. Now you need the front line, but you can give a friendly unit +2/+2. So this looks very similar, but I think it's still very different. You have a necessary requirement, but if you hit this, you are able to snowball harder. You can buff you can buff +2/+2 on any unit. This can be a bomber, this can be artillery. I see a return of artillery decks, at least to tier 2 with this card. Greyhound getting into the front and buffing your artillery. Maybe the ambush 45 millimeter anti-tank gun with ambush to be an 3-4 artillery +2 on tanks. It's looking very, very strong still. Different. It's more aggro heavy and more snowball heavy. So it won't be that effective in the late game. But yeah, this is another reason why the L6, or maybe the main reason why the L640 got nerfed a little bit.
Awesome. That makes perfect sense. And just quick question for you, Jking, regarding this. Obviously, one of the things which really suffers from bounce is guards. And when I think guards, one of the main decks which comes to my mind is Soviet Control, which I know you're a big fan of. Do you think with this nerf to bouncing that Soviet Control may see a little bit more play in the meta, sort of on ladder? Or do you think this isn't relevant enough for that to have any real effect on that?
I think for sure that this will help the Soviet-US matchup, and I think that was already a matchup which you did not want to see if you are the US player. Although I will say if people are cutting 99th in favor of other cards, I think it will be a massive help for Soviets. If people are keeping 99th in, it could see the matchup stay about the same for a different reason, because a lot of the Soviet guides, right now the T60 is like the main meta Soviet guide, which has low health compared to cards like British guide units, for example, like C4 through Gren guides. So if you actually give a unit in the front line +2/+2, it can probably just kill the T60. I think that US still has some tools to fight against Soviets, but it'll be interesting to see how the matchup changes.
Awesome. And then the next change is to HMS Illustrious. All this does, for anyone that's confused, is it means if the swordfish get bounced back to your hand, then they don't regain the blitz. They don't keep blitz. So it's not a huge change. I don't think it's worth spending any time on that one, really. And the next card with a relevant change is No Surrender. It now costs 1 more, but the upside is that it gives these units blitz. Now, I've seen people talking about this being a big buff to tokens, potentially, where you can now flash out units into the front line, but I've also seen rumours of potential Ura OTK deck with this. Do you guys think this either of these are going to be relevant enough to the meta, or do you think these are going to stay to the sort of meme and tier 3 decks? Starting with you, Jking.
I have seen responses to this card all over the board. I've seen people talking about the OTK. I've seen people talking about it being a massive buff to tokens. And I've seen a lot of people saying that this is going to be a massive nerf to tokens because the card just comes out, like it comes out later and it's harder, more expensive to combo it with Industrial Might or cards such as that. I think that this is going to have maybe not an immediate impact on the meta, but I think this card will be strong and this card will 100% see play in the near future. Maybe tokens needed a bit more support to become tier 1, but with the new No Surrender and double Ura, that's a lot of damage. Just off the top of my head, that's 28 attacking into the front line with all excess damage going face. Maybe that's a bit convoluted. You need 11 credits, 3 specific cards, and if you need your opponent to have a specific board. So I don't think the OTK is something to be worried about becoming too strong, but it definitely sounds something fun to try out.
Awesome. And next is the card which a lot of people I think may struggle to pronounce. The Argosy Hide and Dis is how I believe it is done, but even I could be wrong on that one. Now this now has been changed from getting buffed by +3 attack when guarded to getting +1/+1 when you deploy or add a guard unit. But it is worth noting that it doesn't have guard itself. Darkness, do you think this is going to be at all meta relevant? I mean, it is a 1/6 for free, which can get buffed very quickly if you have a lot of guards, and it does include add, so you could put this in a Legions deck. You could use this with mobile defense, where you can spawn in a lot of guards very quickly. Do you think this would be at all relevant, or do you think this card is still just not going to see any serious play?
This card is in power creep now. It looks super powerful, super dangerous. However, I don't think it's easy to being played in a current top tier deck. The aggro is very much focused on the ladder, and the meta is very much focused on aggressive decks, on mid-range decks, or on huge control decks. and it's hard to make some space for this card. But if you step away from the like current tournaments and the OCC and look at like the middle player pool, maybe not the OCC but close to the OCC, if you're playing an strong, if you're playing a strong control deck to beat all the J aggro going on, and you drop this turn 3, playing C4s, Highlander, playing some East Surrey regiments, playing Grenadier Guards, this guy is getting to be huge and very hard to deal with.
Awesome, thank you. And I think we're going to keep it moving. So we're going to go to dive bombing, which has been changed from giving -3 attack and -1 defense to dealing 1 damage and setting the unit's attack to 0 until the next turn. Now, this has the potential to reduce a lot of damage on a unit which hits very, very hard. But obviously, you can't do this as a reaction. If a unit hits very hard, it generally will have an opportunity to hit you once, especially if it has like Blitz in like OTK or something. So you can prevent ever being touched with this, but you can certainly slow down a big aggressive unit, and you can even, you know, a unit which is difficult to trade with, sort of like maybe a C4 Highlanders, you can put this on that and trade into them very efficiently. Jking, do you think this is going to see any competitive play with this, or do you think this is just a sort of buff to newer players who maybe don't have the collection they need to build a fully, you know, fleshed out deck, and this just helps them stay a little bit relevant?
I think 100% that this is an amazing card that will see competitive play. I'm calling that now. I know for a fact that this is going to be the first card I try out when the patch gets released. I think this effect is insanely strong because 1 credit, deal 1 damage. That's just, it's not great, it's not terrible, but the set at any unit's attack to 0 until your next turn is amazing in so many different situations, and it actually scales into the late game, which is something that I think Germany had a lot of problems with. So German removal, what we've seen run before, is sudden strikes and through the breaches. Through the breach, just flat 1 or 2 damage, and sudden strike can only target units that cost 2 or less. This dive bombing can be played on a 10 credit unit. This dive bombing can be played on a C4 to kill it entirely without losing any of your units. This can be played against a Fury plane unit against Brit Air. If you don't have the ability to remove it that turn, you can just 0 attack, can't deal damage to me next turn, and then I get an extra credit next turn to deal with it, or an extra card next turn to deal with it. I think this card is insane. The trouble is, how do you fit it into German decks? Because German decks do generally struggle for draw, so you can't just throw 4 of this into a deck. It will take some tinkering around with to figure it out, but I think this card will 100% see competitive play.
Bold claims, but I hope you are right. I think dive bombing is a card I would love to see have a little bit of relevance on the meta. It's got such a cool artwork, it's such a cool design, and it's just been on the sidelines for so long. The next card is the K51 Sonia. This is getting changed from a 2 credit card to a 1 credit card. Slightly reminiscent of a swordfish now, not quite as nice stats, but it does have this fairly nice ability. Darkness, do you think there's any possibility of a sort of Japan air deck becoming meta, or a Japan pin deck? And do you think there's any possibility of actually running this in very aggressive decks, maybe like Jagro, and buffing it with the Type 93 as just a very powerful early 1-drop?
The Sonia is now definitely an option you can consider. I don't think it will be super strong in an air deck or in a pin deck. You still need to pin the unit first, so to destroy the unit with the effect, and you need another card for that. Even if you use surprise attack, what is 1 credit, you could just use target acquired instead and attack first and destroy a unit then. What is basically the same outcome and not being played either currently. Definitely it is a little buff to Japan pin deck or Japan air deck. Both decks are still not tier 1 or tier 2 in my opinion, but this card would now be a nice addition to the Brit Air deck because it's only 1 credit and you can get a more powerful Empire strikes early on. But I think Jking was referring to this card earlier, so let's give him the chance to talk about it.
Yeah, Jking, anything interesting to add?
I'm very excited about playing this card in the Brit and Japan Air deck because at one operation cost, this is just a swordfish with one less health. Obviously, it's not a British unit, so it has slightly less synergies with close air support. But it's a 1-credit bomber, which makes Empire strikes deal more damage, and you can get them out quicker. There's already a lot of pin synergy in the air deck. You're already running 2 Albacores, Shelling, Monty, and Sexton. The passive effect on it is really good. And just by itself, would you run an additional 1-cost 1/2 bomber? Maybe not. Would you run a 1-cost 1/2 bomber that can sometimes kill any of your opponent's units for free? Of course you would. So I'm not saying this is definitely going to fit into the #1 best meta version of Brit Air, but I think it's entirely possible, and I'm certainly going to try it.
So possibly Calm Before the Storm's out, Sonia's in. They're swapping places. I think it's worth, and obviously that's not Jking's idea, that's my idea. If that takes off, I'm getting full credit for that, you know.
And I would like to add that we've seen Type 94 making its way into Britain Air decks already. We've seen that several different times from several different players at the top of ladder and in OCC, and that's a tank. So if we now have a bomber that has significantly more additional synergy with the deck that accomplishes largely the same thing, I think it will for sure see play.
And you mentioned the synergy of the Albacore. This could take out like a Tiger tank, which can't even be hit by orders. You Albacore pin it, and then you attack it with this. You do 0 damage, but it doesn't matter because it just destroys the unit, even if it doesn't do damage. That's correct. Yeah, so it potentially could be very, very strong. And then our final change of today, which is a rather interesting one, Scouting Party, which used to draw 5 cards and discard drawn cards that were not Japanese units for 4 credits. Didn't really see much play. I think some people experimented it with Japan USA, sort of South discard, but it didn't see too much play. Especially with the changes to the mountain Alpine unit from Soviets, where you used to be able to discard those and put them into play. Now, Scouting Party costs 3 credits, has Intel 1, and adds 2 33rd recons to your support line, which are 1/2 units with 1 operation cost that when they take damage, they draw you a card. I personally feel like this card isn't too strong. Reason being it has Intel, so maybe you could do it in a weird Legions deck, but it adds 2 units to your support line, and in Legions decks, your support line is very valuable because you're trying to spawn in Legions so often. But is there a huge potential for this card that I've missed, or is there some sort of way you can see using this card which maybe players aren't noticing, or do you think this card is still not going to see much play?
I think the obvious synergy with this card would be with Winter Warfare. You play Scouting Party, you play Winter Warfare, you draw 2 cards immediately, and you still have 2 33rd recons on the board, and you now have 2 damaged units for a counteroffensive. But that's a lot of credits to set up. You need other units on the board if you want to play the counteroffensive that turn. Counteroffensive Japan has been a deck that has been long gone for a while, and I don't know if this is enough to bring it back by itself. Balancing this card is a bit of an issue because at 2 credits, this card would be insane. At 3 credits, give them Blitz. This card is insane. At 3 credits, just add 2. It's kind of awkward. You don't really want to use it in a Legions deck because it takes up 2 spots in your support line. I think it's probably way too expensive to use with the new long-range recon to add 2 units to get 2 extra heal off of it. If you compare it to Convoy is 3 credits, draw 2 cards. This is most of the time going to be 3 credits, draw 2 cards. Sometimes it's going to be 3 credits, draw more than 2 cards, and deal damage at the same time. And sometimes you'll play this card and your opponent has 2 Flam Panzers or a Root Out, and it's 3 credits, do nothing. We'll have to see.
Sure, and obviously the draw is staggered, which means you're not getting this sort of instant reward where you can try and find the cards you need quickly. But like you say, it does have the potential to draw you a lot more. Anything to add to this, Darkness?
My main problem with this card is the credit cost. It costs 3. Usually 2 32nd recon will cost 2, so you lose a credit slot. You will lose 1 credit, but you will get 1 intel. I don't think 1 intel is enough to cover for 1 credit, but you get 2 33rd Recon for only 1 card. So this is nice overall. But the 33rd Recon need additional operation costs to get moved into the front line or to get attacked. If, let's say, you need 1.5 each to draw, get to attack into the front line or to move into the front line and then attack. On average, this will cost you 6 credits to draw 2 more cards and you deal like 2 damage. And I don't think this is not enough, not even the intel aspect. If there would be a strong intel card, an intel deck with Japan, or like Jking mentioned, a combination with Winter Warfare to really abuse those additional units, this card would be strong. But right now, I don't see the potential.
Thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, ask any questions, share it with your friends, all of that fun stuff, and we will catch you next time.